Why is it so hard to be married to an archaeologist? Because they're always trying to dig up the past. All right, that was the joke of the day. Today we have an amazing guest, Ed Barnhart. He is an archaeologist, explorer, and educator, specializing in ancient civilizations of the Americas, particularly the Maya, Aztec, Olmec, and Inca. We had an amazing conversation. We talked about human sacrifice, psychedelics, rituals, religion, exploration, Spanish conquest, giant Amazonian woman warriors. It was super entertaining. I had a great time. We could have talked for many more hours. Ed Barnhart, it's an honor to have you on the show.
An honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled to have you here because the Americas are just such a massive area to cover, and I kind of haven't really looked into it. You know, Greece gets all the attention, Egypt, that part of the world, but there's a lot going on in the Americas, and it's pretty big. So I'm hoping you can enlighten me on just everything today.
You're right. It's a huge topic. Just, portions of the Americas are whole, semester classes. But I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it because you're right that it's a huge part of the world that almost no one talks about or knows anything about. For a long time, we were just kind of denying, I guess, for lack of a better word, that there were major civilizations there, but there were. And, my life mission has been to try to help them gain their rightful place in the world civilizations.
Well, you've been doing an amazing job at that. I really enjoyed listening to your podcast, and your YouTube channel is amazing. I just love those little clips, and I'm like, it's kind of addicting to just dive down the rabbit hole. There's so many interesting, it's a area of the world that is so unique. The traditions, the ceremonies, the rituals. It's like, God, what went through their minds to get to that point,
For people like you and I that really appreciate the human experience, they're like a huge missing piece of the puzzle of who we as humans are. The beautiful ways in which they see the world are so different in some ways from the other parts of the world, like Greece and Egypt. They really, I think, studying them teaches things about ourselves.
Yeah, and I'm curious to learn, where does this story begin? What I was taught in school is that about 13,000 years ago, there was that Bering Land Bridge, and humans crossed from Russia through Alaska and came down into the Americas. So basically, the southern tip of South America was the last place where humans arrived. It's kind of the narrative I was given. Is that an accurate story?
I grew up with the same stories. And it's funny, the field has somewhat come full circle. The 13,000 years ago, that's been busted. But the route has been somewhat reaffirmed by DNA studies. There was a long time where we were thinking, especially when it came to early dates in South America, wow, do we have the story wrong? Did they migrate to the Americas from a different direction? Did they come across Oceania, or did they come from Europe? But the DNA studies are really showing that it was from Asia for sure. And it would appear when you track that DNA that it does originate in that Alaska area and filter down. The new story that's emerging is that it wasn't as simple as just one time that humans came over. Humans came over multiple times. It was true that around 13,000 years ago, there was a big wave of them. But before that, there was probably one closer to 30. And now the madness, but still on the table, is that there could have been a first one as early as 60,000 years ago. That's what DNA is pointing to.
Wow.
Archaeology can't substantiate that yet.
Okay, I've never heard of this 60,000. What evidence is pointing to that?
Well, the one that comes just off the top of my head is a study that was probably a decade ago now from A&M University, who were just using all of this kind of DNA evolution, the same stuff that Ancestry.com and 23andMe and everybody use. And they were looking at, mutations, diversities, and that was the first study I saw that said, based on all these different populations, the diversity seems to start as early as 60,000. For sure, there was a punctuated moment around 30, maybe 30 to 25, and then a final wave. So that's a neat story that if humans came in, 3 to 5 different phases, and in between them were thousands of years of them, milling around, figuring out different environments, populating some places, abandoning others, then this whole mix of DNA wasn't just coming from, it wasn't just waves of Asians after Asians. Once they really got into it, it was, isolated populations of Native Americans that were isolated for thousands of years and then maybe interacted later. So it's funny how DNA is giving us a brand new picture, but as DNA develops, the picture all of a sudden becomes clouded again. It's so complicated.
Yeah, one of those things that clouds the picture, I remember got a lot of press, was in 2015. There was a study in Nature that showed there was a link between populations, tribes, indigenous tribes in the Amazon area, linking them to indigenous Australian people. And so that kind of insinuated that there might have been this massive voyage navigating the Pacific. Is there any truth or possibility to that?
Well, I'll admit I did not read that particular study, but there are a lot of some such that are suggesting, Australia is literally the other side of the planet, but, Oceania coming across from like Easter Island, or Africa coming across to South America. There's lots of those things that are floating around out there. And to be completely honest, I'm just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop and, sitting there with my popcorn, waiting for one smart guy to fight another smart guy to see who wins. But I don't know how to sequence DNA. I don't know you, but I doubt you know how to either. So we're really, both of us are in a, frankly, a faith-based endeavor here. We just traded guys with frocks for guys with lab coats. And I wonder personally that, DNA is such a young science. When are these guys going to sort it out? When are they going to have a clearer picture? Because like so often science is, the deeper they're getting into these DNA studies, the more cloudy it's becoming. The data is just kind of overwhelming the signal, The noise and the signal are one and the same sometimes.
Yeah, that's what I really appreciate about you. Your take has been so refreshing. When I first discovered you on Lex Friedman podcast, and you were reacting to Graham Hancock's theories, and I was so used to archaeologists just bashing him right from the bat, and you were the first real archaeologist that seemed open-minded to some of his very extreme, extraordinary theories, and I think that was a great attitude. You're not saying that it's true or false, but the book is still open. The possibilities are still open, but let's see what the evidence says. Let's not just say, no, that can't be possible and not look into it,
I'm a big tent guy. And I think that all theories should be on the table until we can discount them. And when it comes to Graham's theories, I don't believe them. Just, for the record, I do not think there was a single civilization that seeded the rest of humanity. But that's a difficult one to disprove. And, why not let it sit on the table until we have irrefutable evidence otherwise? Graham is a very nice man. He's very smart. I had the benefit of a great independent thinker mentor, Linda Sheely. And her words have always rung in my ears since my days as her student, that she told us all, these grad students, she said, none of the big paradigm shifting ideas are going to come from any of you guys, because you're already poisoned by all the things you read and you think you know. All of the paradigm shifting ideas come from people outside the field. So don't ever discount smart people who have seemingly outlandish ideas about what we're studying.
That's a great idea. Great attitude, because I think that if you shut down those fringe ideas, they tend to only gain more steam. But if you kind of allow them to just...
You're living through that moment.
Allow them to try to prove themselves in the arena of public thought, public opinion. If they hold up, that's great. But a lot of these fringe theories, if they're allowed to just breathe air, they die on the vine, I guess.
Yeah, I think that almost every really paradigm shifting idea on the planet was considered heresy and madness by most, right up till the second that it was brilliant and it changed the way all of us thought. So I try to keep that in mind. I'm not saying again that Graham's is one of those, but you just don't know until you know, do you?
Right. So in your career, have you had any paradigm shifting ideas that people said weren't possible and you went out and found it?
I've bared witness to some, but I don't know whether I myself have inspired any.
Well, I heard you discovered a massive city.
I think Göbekli Tepe is a great example of just a total paradigm shifter. We had no idea there was a civilization that was building stone buildings and gathering in that way until it was found. And I mean, gosh, archaeology had been going on for over 100 years at that point, and we missed something huge like Göbekli Tepe. That's huge, and it totally changed our timeline and the textbooks. The Amazon's another great example. I mean, forever, right up until like the 1960s, the almost unified opinion was that there was nothing in there. And now, gosh, I mean, I can't even keep up with all the discoveries.
Are these discoveries coming from LiDAR?
No, LiDAR is assisting them. But still to this day, most of these things are found by ground terrestrial survey. LiDAR's better and better at showing us sites that we do find. Now, once we can focus in the LiDAR, we find all sorts of nuances that the survey on the ground didn't find. But there are few and far between examples where LiDAR has actually discovered something. And that's it's an internet thing. LiDAR gets clicks. Discovering cities with lasers from space is a sexy thing. But when you look at the nuts and bolts work of what archaeologists are doing, I'd say, 90 to 95% of it is getting a better view of sites that we found through more pedestrian means.
Gotcha. So going back to this narrative of the first humans coming into the Americas, what's a good way to think about this? What is like the first civilization or culture to really emerge?
Oh, those are loaded terms, civilization and culture. There's, we have the evidence of humans. Eventually we find things that we could call traditions, but I don't think we have really a culture name for any of the earliest of folks. We had that Clovis, and now we have this blanket term pre-Clovis. And when you're talking about people that far back, even if we do apply to a name to them, it's just some, guy in a tweed jacket who decided that was a cool name. It has nothing to do with who those people really were. So that's kind of funny to think about. But if we're talking about, the first organized people, I think that the best case, which has just recently been challenged, is Monteverde, which is way down in South America, in Chile. And it was a happy accident to preservation, that it was this kind of anaerobic, almost bog-like environment that sucked all the oxygen out of the dirt that was holding these artifacts. So we got a bunch of perishable materials like organic matter and mammoth skins and things that were well dated, and that dates back to 14,900 years ago. Just recently, somebody has done another study of the same site, and they're suggesting that it's only like 8,000 or 9,000 years ago. It's still plenty old, but it would erase this Monteverde thing. But the guy who did the original work in the 70s is he's a hero of mine. He's a very careful researcher. And when he did that work, he invited 100 people to the site and had independent people take samples, and it was really a community decision that this was indeed at least 14,900. His full range of dates actually pushed things back to 21,000. But though he reported them, he says, I don't know. There's something wrong with that, but they're in his reports. He stands on 14,900.
Wow.
Since then, there have been a handful of sites around North America that have been reported as even earlier. Buttermilk Creek in the middle of Texas is supposed to be 17,000 years old. There's a couple of sites along the East Coast that fall into roughly that range, like 17 to 15. So we're beginning to find these sites, but they're like such disparate dots. It's hard to say, oh, there's the civilization, because they're far enough apart from each other that they're acting independently.
By civilization, what do we mean here? Or do they have like a government? Do they have writing?
Yeah, it's a loose term, and it frustrates me that there's no like end all be all authority in archaeology. We are a community that takes votes kind of like American Idol does. Oftentimes it's the most popular theories from the most charismatic guys that win the day, not necessarily the data. That's why when Flint Dibble and Graham Hancock met together, Flint had all the facts, but Graham won that out of the charm offensive. Flint didn't walk out with everybody going, wow, what a hero.
Oh, really? I love Graham Hancock.
He had all the facts.
I'm a big fan of Graham, but I felt that Flint actually held his own quite well in that argument. Yeah. I mean, later it came out that a lot of the stuff he was using wasn't totally secure, but I thought Flint actually did an okay job in that.
I felt for him there too. That was an off the cuff conversation that he was, studied and prepared for. But heck, I'm the same guy. If somebody analyzes this video, they'll probably find at least 3 things that I was wrong about that I just spewed out of my mouth. So I felt bad for him. Like, okay, you exaggerated with that millions of ships thing.
Well, I guess that's what's unique about archaeology. Is it's a little different than other sciences, wouldn't you say? Because it's so up for debate. Like, it seems like every single thing is up for debate.
It is way up for debate, and we don't have a central, final judgment committee who says that geology has that. I'm jealous of those guys.
Yeah.
One of the things that I say about archaeology that is terribly unpopular is that archaeology is not a science. Flint particularly hates it when I say that. I'm friends with Flint. He's a good guy. Archaeology is not a repeatable experiment. As we dig, we destroy the evidence. We try to, keep it as samples and things, but the context clues are everything. Science, at its core, scientific method, is a repeatable experiment. That's what makes it strong, that somebody can come in and duplicate your results and say, yes, I found that, or no, I found conflicting things. That's how theories turn into facts. But archaeology can't do that. One team will dig up a site, it's destroyed, and for the rest of time, humankind has their narrative and their interpretation of that site. And that, I think, is what really engenders all of this debate. Like, so you said that's what you interpreted it at. Well, none of us can see it anymore. We just have your report. I can test this.
Gosh, that's a little terrifying to think that you digging is, you get one shot at it, really.
It's non-repeatable. And I have come over my career to really lean into what I call non-invasive archaeology. I think there are so many surface clues, so many things we can learn from what we've already excavated. I mean, another terribly unpopular opinion for archaeologists, but I think we should stop digging and start and start thinking more about what we've already dug up and smartly use, before we ever put a shovel in the ground, let's use every clue from the surface at our disposal.
Yeah.
Because it is destructive.
So one of the things you're known for, when I looked you up, is you discovered a massive Mayan city. And I'm curious to know, like, what was your process there? Did you go straight to digging things up, or were you very hands-off? Like, what was your process there?
I never put a shovel in the ground in that city. I never dug one little thing there. I found some tree falls that had thrown ceramics, and I could look how deep they were and see what ceramics they were. So I could already tell it was a terminal classic city just from the ceramics that trees had thrown. But I never dug that city at all. But it was a full city. I was, I was a young buck. I had a dream that sort of thing could happen. And I was 25 when I did it. I was a grad student, and a few of my fellow grad students like openly scoffed at me before I did it. It was a crazy plan. I mean, I really should not have been able to do that. I had like 6 weeks, and I had a topography map, and I was like, this big vast area is what we could search. But look at this setup here. There's a big mountain and 2 little mountains and 3 rivers. It's a triangle with rivers. This is a perfect place for a Maya city. If I could just get out there, I think it would be there. And the other graduate students were like, you think you're just going to go out there with the machete in 6 weeks and find a lost city? That is ridiculous. But I did it.
Yeah. What was that like? What was that feeling like when you hacked away at the last branch and all of a sudden what was the first thing you saw?
It was an amazing moment. We had already found like 5 or 6 villages, so we knew we were in a, Maya community. We didn't know we were on a periphery headed towards the city center. But the day of the discovery, we walked in, we approached the city from the east, and we found a building that was like 5 meters tall, 15 to 20 feet tall. And it was a pyramid. It probably had somebody buried inside of it. But we were like, that is a weird, larger building. Okay, well, let's take this. Back then, I really wasn't very trained in survey at the time, and I came up with this technique that at the time I was calling leapfrog mapping. Now I call it relational mapping. That sounds much more professional. But basically, we worked the jungle like a piece of graph paper. So I had 6 people with me that day. And I said, okay, we're going to start at this building. We're going to put it on a piece of graph paper. You 2 go north. You 2 go west. We already came from the east. Me and Doc Charles will go south, which I actually thought was the least chance of finding something. I wanted my students to find something. But the guys from the west, in about 30 minutes, started yelling my name. And I thought, oh, crap, somebody's probably been bit by a snake. I've got the only EpiPen in my bag. I got to run over there. So I went tearing through the jungle, left Doc Charles there. And when I ran up and I tried to localize their voices again, they were coming from above me. And when I looked up, they were on like a 20-meter tall, long range building. So that was the first building we found. And they were standing up on top of it. I went from like, oh shit, somebody's going to die, to, whoa,
wow,
we did it.
That's incredible. So how big was that area, that civilization?
Well, I named the city after the monkey inhabitants there. When we got up to the top of that building, we had lunch, and a bunch of howler monkeys descended down on us and just yelled and threw stuff at us. So I called it Mashna, which means monkey house. But that day, we discovered a 100 by 100 meter plaza on the other side of that building, 2 more pyramids, a ball court, something that looked like a palace. Then we found a 25-meter pyramid a little farther along, and a big reservoir, and then a bunch of like rich residential houses. In total, I guess over that year and the next year, we found a little over 1,000 buildings.
Well, I guess that's what's unique about archaeology. Is it's a little different than other sciences, wouldn't you say? Because it's so up for debate. Like, it seems like every single thing is up for debate.
It is way up for debate, and we don't have a central, final judgment committee who says that geology has that. I'm jealous of those guys.
Yeah.
So it was a big place. It spread out over kilometers, and really, I'm not done. Through weird political archaeology things, I ended up getting that project taken away from me by my advisor and given it to some other university who gave money to our project. So I had actually reconnaissanced hundreds of more buildings and gave them the map, but they never actually went and documented that. So the city of Mashna is still only half discovered.
And Mashna, is that the name that you gave it? The monkey city?
Yep.
And that's stuck?
That's in Maya. That means ma'ash is a howler monkey, and na is house.
And that name stuck.
Yeah, I got to name it.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, so many people say to me, like, why didn't you name it like Barnhart Town? And I would never do that myself, but it did cause me to look into naming conventions. And as far as I can see, it's like people of Western European descent feel the need to name places and mountains after themselves or after great men. All the other cultures of the world, they don't do that. They name it like Blue Sky or, Dragon Mountain or, Place with Three Rivers. It's only Western European guys that feel the need to name the earth with their own name, brand their name on it for a piece of immortality or something. I don't know what it is, but it's kind of an audacious practice.
It's probably so common at this point, I don't even notice it. Just like, oh yeah, that's...
it's weird. You look at all the names of the names of China, the regions, the cities. You look at there's in the Maya area, there's never been a Pakal town or nobody names things after themselves, only the Europeans.
So, wow, there's so many things I wanted to talk to you about. I guess, should we get into... The Olmecs are kind of like the seed civilization of the later Maya, Inca, Aztec. Is that a good way to think of it?
That's a fair statement for Mesoamerica. We started off talking about the Americas, and it's just so vast. The trajectory of civilization in South America was very different than that in what I call Mesoamerica. And then there's a whole civilization track in North America. And these three major civilizations, we have really a very scant piece of information that they met each other. There's tantalizing clues, but there's nothing, concrete. Like, nobody denies that the Greeks were in India. There was a huge amount of artifacts and historical documentation that makes that true. But there's nothing like that for these three areas that grew up in relative isolation, or as far as we know now. But if we just center down to Mesoamerica, yes, the Olmec are our first named civilization. Before that, it's generally the Archaic period.
I see. And you just did a video recently about this wild discovery of these ilmenite cubes from the Olmec.
Ilmenite. That's a weird word, isn't it? It's hard. I always want to say ilmenite or something.
Ilmenite. And what is ilmenite?
It's a weakly magnetic metal mineral, but it's black. It can be shined up, and it's a rock, basically. A mineral, but it's got weakly magnetic properties, and it's pretty rare in Mesoamerica. It's not just everywhere, and the Olmec took this material, which they had to get from some distance from the cities we find it in, and they honed it into these little cubes that were, maybe the size of a walnut. They're not perfect cubes like dice. A lot of them are rectangular, but they carefully drilled 3 holes through them. One that goes through one side into another, and then another one that touches that tube. So they kind of interconnect in the middle. And they made tons of them. There were 6 metric tons of them found buried next to the palace in the first big Olmec city named San Lorenzo. And that cache was found in the 1960s by guys from Yale. And they scratched their heads about it, and they thought about it, and they wrote a paragraph about it, and they moved on. I really, from that time, they should have, Mike Coe should have been more baffled by that. But they weren't. There was another cache found of, I think that big cache had over 100,000 of these little cubes, and another one had 1,500. There were tons of these things, and they're scattered around. But what the heck are they? I don't know. So my video was about, like, here's a weird artifact type that nobody's ever come up with a reasonable explanation of, but it's not just like some little one-off. There's 6 metric tons of these things in an elite context. What the heck are they?
So did they have a function?
I don't know. The simplest explanation that I favor is that somehow or another they were weaved into a net or smaller things, but with the three holes, they definitely look like it's the same process that you'd make beads out of. And the Maya, we know, loved to do the same sort of thing with jade, where they made these platelets and they'd make armor out of jade, or sometimes they'd make a headdress or even just like something more jewelry like, not weapons like. But they would weave them through, they'd make little holes and then they'd weave them into a shirt or a net or something. But these are heavy. It's funny, they're just sitting around in the San Lorenzo Site Museum run by, two sleepy guys. They're in this cement bucket as the footing for some ceramic pieces. It's like the guys that run the place, I don't think they even know what they are. But they were just sitting there in a bucket, so I actually got to pick one up and touch it and look through it, and they're pretty heavy. So using them as garments would get heavy really fast. There was the most famous and productive of all the archaeologists at San Lorenzo was a woman named Anne Cyphers. She passed away about 2 years ago. She found the latest Olmec colossal head there at San Lorenzo, head number 10, and its headdress, all the Olmec heads have different headdresses. This one, Olmec head 10, has a headdress that looks like it's little cubes with a hole in them. So she suggested that maybe that headdress was made out of these little cubes. But it would be, if you made one that would fit even my head, gosh, that would be like 30 pounds or something, that maybe more. That would be a heavy headdress. Which, now that I think about it, is not, it's not, that did occur among the Maya, is what I'm trying to say. We know that the Maya were wearing these huge, heavy headdresses that were like 50 pounds. They had all sorts of rock in them, and they went way up, and they had their ancestors or birds up there. I was part of a neat study in Belize where we found the tomb of a king in a site called La Milpa. And we had these great osteologists that normally worked for the Toledo Police Department. They were like forensics guys. They looked at this king's skeleton and said, his spine is compacted, and the way that the muscles dug in, this guy was constantly carrying like 50 pounds on his head. So there was like actual proof that they were wearing these heavy things. So, maybe the Olmec were doing that with these stones, but it's fun that we found them, 70 years ago, and still nobody knows what the hell they are.
Fascinating. Yeah, I hope somebody does the investigation and figures out what purpose they're for. Maybe it's not super exciting.
Well, let's play the game. How do we figure it out?
Well, I guess I feel
put
like
up theories and we can test them. And a number of early theories were discounted by a study like done a decade ago, where some people were saying, well, maybe they were shaft straighteners for like arrows. But no, practically you can't really do that. There were some other theories that were just kind of like practically discounted. But weaving them into a net, that's definitely possible. But then where do we go from there?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that believe that magnetism was the key to ancient civilizations moving very heavy stones. And we have this, outrageous San Lorenzo, where we found this 6 tons of these things, is the first Olmec city that really starts dragging multi-ton basalt monuments from a volcano 60 kilometers away to the site and up onto their big platform. And that is also a mystery. How did they do that? How did they get that stone to there? And there are always fringe theories, I'm going to call them, that magnetic resistance was used. It's a great theory. I actually, that's also not off the table to me. You just got to show me how. So, are these, 100,000 cubes and their weakly magnetic quality somehow involved? I'm probably making some of my colleagues' eyes cross even discussing that with you.
Well, no, I think it's so fascinating.
Yeah,
because if they were just using it for fishing nets, they could have used any rock, right? But
They could have made ceramic, like a lot of ones do, just ceramic balls. They come and go. It would be easy. They've got the clay there. The nearest source of this ilmenite that we know of is a couple 100 kilometers away from where we found these big caches. So they were, there was something very particular about that stone that they wanted. And we did find a quarry, which I mentioned in that video. So, I mean, people were actually working it out of the ground from there and then transporting it into the Olmec. I don't know if there's any found outside the Olmec area. That's an interesting question. But it's funny, again, archaeology is not a science. It's done by a crew, well-intentioned crew, of course, but, what they publish is what we get. And if somebody, was like, well, this is a weird rock, that one goes in the trash, that was the end of the story.
yeah. Well, I had this crazy vision that one day we'll be able to have the technology to actually just look back in time. Like I had this idea where, how when we're looking at stars, it takes however many years for that light to get to us. Well, I wonder if we could teleport to 20,000 light years away and then look at the Earth. Suddenly we're looking at Earth 20,000 years ago. It's kind of, who knows if that's ever going to happen, but maybe there will be a day where we could just say, oh, you want to look at the Olmecs with these cubes? All right, yeah, let's just zip that far away from the Earth and we'll look back.
So in your theory, we don't actually interact with that time period. We just have like a looking glass to look into it.
Correct.
That's cool. And that avoids all of the, the time paradox things from sci-fi movies.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Who's to say? Again, we don't know what we don't know. I don't think we even really understand the speed of light yet for, all of its properties. So
100%.
I love that Captain Picard is an archaeologist, and he'll just like fly up to a planet and, give it the super futuristic LiDAR, and he's got the whole sequence worked out. That's the day I dream of.
Captain Picard.
I don't know. I think that's cool, but the goal of my career has been the adventures and the exploration. I mean, I would not trade that for sitting in a chair and watching things appear on my screen for a moment. In some regards, it'd be a huge bummer if we could just know everything from space. Now, seeing them actually alive, that would be a different thing. So your time telescope is a cool one.
Yeah, that's a great attitude. I mean, I think the mystery is part of what makes it exciting. If we had all the answers, it'd be like, all right, I guess I don't need to go down there. But I can't imagine how exciting it would be to be hacking through that jungle, not knowing what you're going to find, and then just coming across something.
It was an exciting time of life, and it really was like that. The jungle's so thick that, I mean, there were multiple times where I was hacking through the jungle and there was a pyramid literally 5 meters ahead of me. And I did not know that until I hacked the next 3 meters. And then boom. Oh, it's a wall. What's this? Really, really amazing adventures. I was looking at some of your videos, and a recent one you were talking about AI and AI slop.
Yeah.
And it was, that spoke to me. That was a good video. But it's not just, I agree, we could get less drudgery tasks. Great. But it's the human experience. I mean, that's the spice of life, our experiences. If a robot had those experiences for me, well, that would suck.
Yeah. I watched movies about these ancient times, ancient Greece or Apocalypto. And, you think, oh my God, it would be so hard to live in that time. Look at all the struggles. They had no conveniences. But then these people really weren't struggling with a sense of meaning or being disconnected from reality because they were there. They're not going to be watching a movie about us on our phone, but we're going to be watching a movie about them.
I fear that a lot of, the current new generations are just mistaking observation for experience. You put that nice little bit in from Good Will Hunting that spoke to that nicely.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, there was a famous philosopher in the mid-1900s named Bulliard, French guy. And when Disneyland opened, he walked in and said, oh my gosh, you've got France land and Germany land and all these different themed lands. Why would I ever need to go there myself? This is way better than going to France. Or you got to buy. And so then he actually came up with a theory based on his experience there that humans were going to separate themselves from reality and just be voyeurs of reality. And instead of experiencing anything, they were just going to watch it. And he kind of predicted social media in like 1950s. And just, why would we do anything? We can just kind of get close to it and, watching it.
But the one thing he didn't count on is that we could fake that reality. So now you're watching something that you think is reality and isn't. And then we're all just discoupled from life completely. That's what's happening. I mean, geez, I see it around the internet, people talking about it, but I feel it myself. Like, every time I find joy in a cat video and then discover it's AI, it shrinks my heart a little. Like, that's, I just feel good about a total illusion. Shit.
Oh, I feel you. I mean, the thing is, at first I was like, look at this terrible AI, look at this terrible AI. And then I started to say, oh, at least I'm not seeing AI anymore. And then I thought, wait, or am I? And it's just gotten that good. So
it really has. And pointlessly, I mean, there's some great stuff that why did you fake that? It's confusing.
Well, on the bright side, I think that people are going to seek out real experiences more and more because it's going to be the only thing that is real. So you're going to get an influx of tons of young people that are probably going to want to discover their own cities or go through the Amazon and feel like one of those early Spanish explorers, just to feel a sense of meaning, to have an experience.
That was the end conclusion of the movie Ready Player One, wasn't it?
I can't remember, but it's a good conclusion.
I hope so. And I know this next generation is going to make it. As a studier of history, one thing that's a commonality is that the current generation looks at the younger generation and says they're never going to make it in this world. And then those guys wake up one day as the old people that go, hold on, it's me that doesn't fit in this world. And they seem to be doing just fine. So I have no idea how the younger generation is going to overcome this challenge, but humans always have.
Well, I don't envy them. I wouldn't want to be young right now.
It's AI is an adaptation of technology. And yes, it's making us less capable. But we will find a way to use that as a tool. I reflect, I tell students all the time, I think that ancient people were way the hell more competent than we are. They knew how to make their shirt. They knew how to build a house. They knew how to fish. Like the average Joe today, we don't know any of that. If we were, if the only clothes I could wear are the ones I made, I would be in rags.
That's a good point. Well, maybe the Mayan calendar was really pointing to the birth of AI, not the end of the world.
Well, no evidence on that one so far, but it is a fascinating calendar. I was saying earlier about, these cultures, these civilizations of the Americas are a really missing piece of the puzzle of who we are as humans and how we think and what we do. And their calendar is such a cool example of a totally different kind of calendar than the rest of the world was making. The thing that a really unique thing about the Maya calendar, and I should say Mesoamerica, because everybody was using the very first calendar they made, was 260 days. It had 20 day names and then 13 numbers that would kind of revolve through each other for a unique day name for all 260 days, and then it would reset. 13 times 20 is 260. Well, why did they do that? That was, that has nothing to do with the stars. Most civilizations on the planet began with lunar counts and solar counts. And as agriculture took place, solar counts became more important because they were hooked to the agricultural cycle. And so we get these luni-solar calendars. And the Maya did develop those after a while. But the first one for hundreds of years was this 260-day calendar, their sacred calendar. Do you know why they picked 260?
No, why?
Because it's 9 months. It's the human gestation period. when the Maya thought about time that meant something to humans, they picked our very first cycle of life, from conception to birth. And Maya today say that. There's lots of evidence from within the hieroglyphs that they believed that. Each one of those 20-day names in hieroglyphs, they oftentimes are surrounded in a thing called a cartouche, which is, like taken from the Egyptian cartouches around kings' names. But then it has these interesting little scrolls that come out from underneath it. All the 20 days are represented like that. And somebody, I think it was David Stewart, first proposed, like, is that a vagina and they're being birthed out of the vagina and the blood and the scrolls below are blood? Because in a lot of other contexts, scrolls like that are blood. So there's a visual representation that they're envisioning these 20-day names as being birthed. But the thought that the Maya, instead of looking up into the stars, looked to themselves, into themselves for the cycle that meant something to them, I think that's beautiful.
That's so interesting. I actually didn't comprehend that the year was shorter. I somehow I thought, I heard that it was 260 days, but then I thought that they had some sort of grace period that they just ignored, and they're like, all right, a new year is going to start.
Oh, it's very complicated. They made multiple cycles that ran concurrently. By the time you're in the classic period and you see a stela that's naming deeds of a king, the first column, the whole column is the date. And they'll tell you what date it is in, I think, 7 different ways, and then finally get to the verb, object, subject part. They have that sacred calendar, 260. The next one they make is a solar calendar, 365, which is not perfect. It lacks the leap year. And that Hob, we call it the vague calendar because it just drifts. They knew better, but they just let that drift. Then they make the long count, and the long count is a weird one. Most of their thinking is cyclical. The long count is a linear count of days, more in a Western fashion. But the long count's year is only 360 days, which is super weird. There's not really, there's theories, but no agreed upon reason they did that. Because that, way into the agricultural period, why would a bunch of farmers name a 360-day year? They know way better. That would put harvest a month away in just a few years. So weird calendar that it uses that. By then, they've established their number system. Our Western world uses the decimal system, 0 through 9, and then the next number is a 1 and a 0. The Maya used 20. So it's called a vigesimal system. So counting in groups of 20, some people say, well, they just picked 360 because it was the closest increment of 20 days to the solar period. I've never found that as a very satisfying answer. I think there are deeper reasons, and I've spent a lot of my career trying to figure them out. I'm sad to say I don't have, and I figured it out. Still working on it.
Well, they clearly had a very precise knowledge of time and the orbit, based on the shadow, that snake shadow on the side of Chichen Itza. I mean, that's incredible.
That's an architectural feat and an astronomical feat because they had to angle it just right. Figuring out what day is equinox, well, that's easy. That's every farmer knows that. But that angling of it, that was something that took a lot of pre-planning. And in my opinion, things like that was meant to be seen by a lot of people. There are certain stories that talk about Maya mentality that want to paint a picture where there were these erudite priests who were astronomers and knew all this stuff, and then most of the people were ignorant masses, and they were just like the farmers and the slaves and the peasants. I've always thought it's the opposite, that a building like Chichen Itza's Castillo was built to honor those people, to celebrate the core knowledge of farming, that the cycles, and to celebrate what the whole community had in common, rather than it being some ritual act of magic where priests were trying to impress ignorant peasants. I think it was the opposite. I think they were The priests were honoring the core of Maya life, which was corn farming and the cycle of the sun.
Wow. Do you find a lot of these ancient sites are aligned to the cosmos in some way, or have shadows that?
No, no, I don't, which is
Yeah.
really frustrating because that's what I read when I was a kid. And I wanted to go out there and continue that great tradition of finding all these astronomical buildings. Over my lifetime, I found a hell of a lot more that weren't. There are certainly alignments, but they are not the commonality. I mean, humans are humans. A lot of people just built their stuff without worrying about that. I think they built certain buildings that they wanted to interact with mostly the sun, but not everyone.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of understand the consciousness of the looking inward. I like what you said about their calendar being 9 months is an inward looking way of telling time. And it almost reminds me of human sacrifice here, where it's like they were looking inward to try to control or dictate the stars in some way. Like, oh, it hasn't rained in a while. Well, clearly we need to do something inward to make the external world, to just change the external world. And I kind of, that was my corny way of segueing into human sacrifice, because I really
got it. I think it was smooth. I think we smoothed right into it.
because that was I'm really like chomping at the bit to talk to you about that.
Sacrifice is a complicated subject. Again, ancient Americas were not a monolith. Different cultures did things for different reasons. The Maya oftentimes get lumped in with the Aztecs. The Aztecs did a ton of sacrifice. And they did it thinking that that's what their gods demanded. The story that they had of their creation story involved the sun for the fifth world that we're now in came up just to the horizon, but then didn't keep going. And the ugliest of the Aztec gods throws himself into the fire to sacrifice himself, and the sun goes boop, just a little higher up. And the rest of the gods say, well, geez, he was brave. We're cowards. The sun needs sacrifices to move through the sky. And they all throw themselves into the fire and sacrifice themselves. And so the Aztecs had this rooted philosophy that in hard times, sacrifice was necessary, and that the sun needed certain sacrifices to just keep going. That's what they told us. But that's the Aztecs. Not everybody did that. I'll share with you an interesting story that I got not from ancient people, but from modern Maya people. In the highlands of Chiapas in Mexico, there's a number of very traditional Maya communities. In Cholula and Zinacantan, there's a whole satellite of these Maya communities that still hold on to many of their traditions. And one of the things they do as modern folks is they'll go into their churches. Cholula took the church away from the Catholics, and there's pine needles on the floor, and families who are suffering in one way or another will come in and they'll sacrifice a chicken. They'll cut its neck and they'll kill the chicken. And so that's a sacrifice. But as it was explained to me by these people, it's a sacrifice on their part. I was like ignorantly like, how does killing a chicken help you? They said, that was a chicken that our family could have eaten, but we gave it up instead. And we're trading suffering for suffering. There was they and people in Zinacantan both told me almost scientifically that there's a constant amount of suffering in the world. And that if you want one kind of suffering to be alleviated, you must replace it with another kind of suffering. And so the family suffering in that regard might help grandma get well. Her suffering will end because you're imploring the gods and the powers that be to let me take this suffering instead of her. In Zinacantan, there's a professional there's a job, professional criers, who people go into the church and they want to like really weep and be sad and feel that pain to relieve the pain of their sick loved ones or whoever. But some people can't really cry like that. So they'll hire somebody to sit right next to them and just wail I've seen it a couple of times where somebody's doing the praying and then there's a guy right next to him going, ah, and it's suffering for suffering. That's and the context of sacrifice, I think that's an echo of how they felt about it.
That's
I think a real important thing to remember about their sacrifices too is they weren't just sacrificing like, the guy that pisses everybody off or the village idiot. They were always sacrificing things that were treasures. For the Aztec warrior culture, it was other warriors. This guy could have had an incredible life, but we will sacrifice that for the greater of society. Or, one of the really macabre ones that we from the Western world are horrified by is the idea that you sacrifice children. But the perspective was the gods don't want our trash. They want what we care about the most. And if this is a sacrifice that shows our devotion, children are our most precious thing.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of when you look at maybe animals, they don't really have a concept of the future, and you don't see animals doing ritual sacrifice. And I think maybe very primitive humans discovered the future. They discovered like abstract thought, and they thought, okay, maybe I can negotiate with the present moment, and that will lead to a better future. If I sacrifice now in the present, that will lead to a better future. And that was an amazing discovery. But I think they may have gotten the menu confused with the food a little bit, because they got so fixated on the sacrifice that, all the focus and energy went on making a more and more holy, valuable sacrifice. But the concept, the essence of the original idea of this negotiation with the future is there still. The more you struggle in the future or in the present moment, ideally, the better the future is going to be. The more you sacrifice now, if I don't eat the sugary food and I go to the gym, I'm going to live longer and I'm going to feel better. That's kind of a microcosm of that bigger idea.
And in that regard, it's one of our human commonalities. This, the concept of sacrifice in its many forms. Human sacrifice is the most extreme, but not eating that cookie is another form of sacrifice for a better future because you feel you're in a stinky now. I think that's a human commonality. I had a great class in Boulder as an undergraduate called Sacrifice as Social Drama. Loved it. It taught me so much about like the different ways that different kinds of sacrifices we make and our motivations behind them. I wrote a paper that compared Henry V at Agincourt and their willingness to sacrifice themselves with the Jim Jones Guyana Punch thing. I don't remember all the specifics of it, but it was interesting to compare the two moments of willingness to sacrifice.
Yeah, so just
and what they thought they were doing.
So how brutal did the Aztec sacrifice get?
They were out of hand. By their own admission and by Spanish eyewitness, they sacrificed multiple people a day. Every day, people were sacrificed on the Temple Mayor. The Aztecs reported to Sahagún, multiple of them did, that when the last phase of the Temple Mayor was celebrated and inaugurated by 3 days straight of sacrifices, that there were some 20,000 people that got their heart extracted on top of the temple, and that the blood was so thick on the top of the temple that it was ankle deep.
God. And
so that was brutal.
And these are based on
the Spaniards. Cortez and his boys were horrified by it. They were just, they're like, stop sacrificing people. Like, oh, well, yeah, sure, we won't do it today, but we got to do it tomorrow. I mean, the sun's got to come up. And there were certain months in their calendar system, in their festival system, that demanded a whole lot of sacrifice. Sometimes people up on the temple, sometimes other weird ones. There was one of the Aztec calendar month festivals involved everyone gathering in a big place and dancing, but then as the sun went down, they'd use obsidian blades and they'd cut on their arms and on their legs a bunch until they were bleeding all over the place, and the whole crowd is bleeding and they're dancing in their own blood.
Wow.
That wasn't, to the death, but that was still a very macabre thing.
So a lot of these things were based on early Spanish accounts. People have labeled this as propaganda to kind of dehumanize these indigenous tribes. Is the forensics are we finding mountains of skulls that kind of back up the Spanish story?
Yes. Okay. We're finding huge skull racks. I mean, we always knew those existed. I think the propaganda is not so much that it was that the Aztecs were doing that. The other cultures around them were not, or to a much lesser extent, and that they're all barbarous human sacrificers and cannibals. Got pasted, from the Aztec to the Maya up into northern Mexico, where really the Aztecs were a particularly psychotic civilization in that regard. They also had a lot of beautiful things they did, but they were bringing it to like a fear strategy thing where it wasn't just an austere sacrifice to the gods. It was like anybody who steps out of line is the next one to get their heart ripped out. And I don't think the Aztecs would have lasted much longer. The Spanish or not, I think that the rest of Mesoamerica would have put them down because they really were just creating a fear-based world like Mesoamerica had never seen.
Yeah, isn't there a horrific account of how the Aztec Empire even really got started? There was that wedding, famous wedding. I can't remember how the story goes.
The Aztecs come in as wanderers and become mercenaries for the larger cities around Lake Texcoco, which is now Mexico City. And they do the dirty work for these kings. They go through a couple cities doing this. But then they win so many battles for one king, he decides, I'm going to make you guys officially part of, I think it was the Culiacan. I forget the name. It starts with Qui. But they say, we're going to let you intermarry into our lineage. And they send the princess, the daughter of the king, to the Aztecs to be married to their leader. But the priests say, no, we're working for the war god. And the war god says that we should sacrifice this girl and rip her skin off and wear it as a coat. So when the king shows up, like a week later, assuming things have gone just the way he said they should go, instead they find the Aztecs wearing his daughter's skin and he freaks out and drives them out. And that begins this long period of wandering for the Aztecs where they finally find, again, based on the prophecies of their priests, where they're going to put their capital city. It's supposed to be where an eagle with a snake in its mouth is standing on a rock. And they see exactly that out in the lake, and they develop Tenochtitlan there. But it begins with ripping a girl's skin off.
God.
That was another month in the Aztec calendar. The Aztecs had a god specifically assigned to that activity, flaying the skin off of people. His name was Xipe Totec. And there was a month where Aztec priests would dress up in the skin of flayed warriors, and they'd walk through the streets, and little kids would come out with like wooden swords and pretend they were bad guys that they would fight off. But it was a whole festival where a group of priests of Xipe Totec would just wander around town in the dried skin of their enemies.
It's just a very different regard for human life, huh?
Very different. But in the same way, they loved music, they loved poetry, they loved gardens. Their gardens were amazing. A typical Aztec king was expected at banquets to get up and recite poetry. Both famous, well-known poetry, but they were expected to make their own poems. They considered themselves statesmen, and they had ballets, and they had musicals. They had a lot of things that we consider part of civilized society, but hand in hand, they ripped the skin off of people.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how the symmetry of life, where you have the beginning of the Aztec Empire is this flaying of the princess, and then the thing that kind of triggers the end is them feeding a human as a joke to one of the Spanish, not Cortez, but his like right-hand man. They
Pedro Alvarez.
Yeah, I don't know the story.
Alvarez.
I just kind of listened to it yesterday, but it is pretty horrifying. He thought, okay,
Did you listen to that from me or somebody else?
I think it might have been from
Because
you.
if it was me, I got somewhat schooled on that by polite Mexicans who said, the one version I read, I did read that at a banquet they tricked him into eating some humans as food, and that's why he freaked out and closed the doors and killed everybody in the banquet hall. But
That's not how it happened.
that's only one version. There are a number of people that were eyewitnesses that wrote versions. That's the version I read, but the majority that Mexicans now understand, it's that he was just totally paranoid that someone's going to assassinate him, and that something in the party triggered him to believe that the assassination plot was about to unfold, and he closed the doors and ordered his soldiers to kill everybody in the banquet, who were women, children. Nobody was armed. It was like, it was a banquet. So either way, what he did was unexcusably brutal.
Well,
But the trigger, I have been told by a number of sources now that I said somewhere in a video a false narrative that the trigger was that he got fed humans. They believe it was worse, that he just was a weird paranoid delusional and decided to do it.
that story makes sense, but they did eat humans, right?
Yes, they did. Yeah, they had cannibalism became a thing. There was this really terrible drought that happened before the Spanish arrived. It was like 5 years worth of drought. And the priest said, well, the gods are mad because we haven't made enough sacrifices. And they hadn't made enough sacrifices because the Aztec Empire had expanded so much that going to the border where the enemies were was a long process. So they decided that they would just disown one group close to them, the Tlaxcalans, and just declare war on them anyway. And they got some close by captives, brought a bunch to Tenochtitlan, sacrificed them, and it rained. And from then on, they said, well, that's what we got to do. Where every year we're going to have what we call the Flowery Wars, where we're going to go and beat up the Tlaxcalans and bring a bunch of people over. And the Tlaxcalans are the ones that Cortez met. And so when Cortez was on his way to get to the Aztecs, he met the Tlaxcalans, who were like, man, we hate those guys. Can we come with you?
So yeah, had he met the Aztecs first, history might have been extremely different.
Perhaps so.
Yeah.
Perhaps so. I think that, the real killer was the infectious diseases. I think from the moment an infected person stepped on the continent, that regardless of Spanish swords or intent, 90% of people would be dead in the next 50 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's these two competing theories of history. I don't know if they're competing. I think they kind of complement each other, but there's the great man theory, and then there's like the great forces theory. And the great man theory is that history is written by these great men like Genghis Khan or Cortez that come in and just change the course of history. And then the great forces theory is that it's like climate change and demographics and population shifting and things like disease that were inevitable, huge forces that shape history. I don't think it's one or the other, but
I think that's kind of nature nurture sort of thing. There's triggers. Was it Columbus or was it the Columbian Exchange? Columbus was actually, poor example. I think that Columbus was a dirtbag, but the Columbian Exchange was intense. The Americas got 13 infectious diseases. The Europeans got a bounty of new fruits and vegetables. But the horses and the cattle that came over to the Americas contributed to the disease, but also transformed life there. So that, a lot of that had nothing to do with the men. It was about the food and the germs.
yeah, how serious was that disease? I've heard accounts that it's 90% of the population was wiped. Is that accurate?
I think that most scholars now agree with that 90% in the first generation or two. The question is, how many were there at the start? That's a tricky question. And there's, it's a horrifying thought to how, the upper numbers say that there were 150 million people in the Americas, and that dwindled down to 15 million. That's horrifying. That's the worst epidemic in world history. Others want to put the number as low as just, a few million that were populating the New World. I think they're also wrong. My number, looking there's now, over a dozen people who have done the statistical analysis and done their best to look through contact period census and things like that. I go with like 100 million. 100 million in the Americas that got dwindled down to 10 million, shocked and, just different people. When everybody dies around you and you believe that, all of the Americas believed that illness was a spiritual thing, not a physical thing, that gods and spirits and forces made someone sick, not dirty water or whatever, that was their conception. So when the Spanish showed up with all this talk about one God and bow to this one God or you'll all suffer, and then everybody dies. Well, shit. I mean, it was proof positive that their gods had abandoned them. And then the actual process was probably in the first wave, who dies when everybody gets sick? The young and the old. And so all of a sudden, you've lost all your children, and you've lost all of your sage elders who are supposed to be transmitting your culture through oral tradition. But they're gone. And the middle guys, half trained, don't have anybody to train because all their kids are dead. And why would they have more kids in such a terrible world? So, the disease did more than kill people. It killed civilization. It killed the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next.
Wow, it's so interesting because we have this rare opportunity where there still are uncontacted tribes out there in the Amazon. And I mean, we can't contact them because they probably would get a disease from us and it would decimate their entire tribe, right?
That's entirely possible. There are a bunch of tribes out there. For me personally, I kind of soberly feel like what more are we going to get from them? Why would we endanger those people for information that we, for the most part, can collect from tribes that have made contact? There's nothing startling out there that would cause us to go, they're not holding anything that we haven't heard from the surrounding tribes. They're in the interior. There's periphery. Even a lot of those uncontacted tribes decide to send, one guy out.
Yeah, what was life expectancy like back then?
I think another unpopular opinion of mine, that a lot of our data about life expectancy is hinged upon old and flawed statistics. That there was an incredible amount of infant mortality because of diseases and lack of medicine, whatever. Life was hard, kids died. We all know that. And in a lot of these Native American groups, they even had traditions like they would give a kid a second name if they made it to 5. That would be their name for the rest of their life. They had like a temp name until they made it to 5. So I think that when we get these statistics that say, oh, the average guy lived to 35 years, I think we're looking at all of our statistical data about when people died, and the mass amount of infant mortality drags the number down. That we should really be, as an academic field, pulling out everybody before the age of 5 and then seeing how long people lived. Because, we rarely get this kind of, how long people lived kind of data for the ancient world. The Maya are a notable exception that they have hieroglyphs. And we have lots of kings that tell us when they were born, what they did, when they died. And there are a ton of Maya kings and lords that live into their 60s, 70s, even 80s. And, you could argue that, okay, well, those are the cream of the crop. They get the best health care, things like that. They'd live longer than the average guy. But I don't know if that's true. There's a funny study that came out of, I think it was Ireland, that showed that actually the peasants around the castle were living a lot longer than the people inside the castle, because those guys were just poisoning themselves with wine and overconsumption of red meat, where the peasants were working every day and eating, potatoes and other things that were healthy and grown out of the ground. They had actually a greater life expectancy than the noble class, who indulged themselves into an early grave.
What was daily life like back then in one of these Mesoamerican cultures? It's hard to generalize across everybody, but how were women treated? What was daily life like?
I'll make a blanket statement about the Americas in this case. Women from the top of Americas to the bottom were fairly equal. They were certainly not second-class citizens. They weren't the majority of the army, but they could serve in the army. We have lots of examples of Maya women that were involved in warfare and even war chiefs. They had positions on councils. They had, up in North America, the 5 nations, there was a council of 50 chiefs, but those chiefs were picked by the women, and the women could, without cause, just say, "You're out, he's in, get out. You don't represent us anymore." So very equal there. There were Maya queens. There were, in South America, there were people, the priesthood. You could be a man or a woman. There was not gender division in that labor.
Sacrifice.
Same thing with the Maya today.
You could sacrifice women and men equally.
Yes. I mean, the South America had a penchant for sacrificing teenage girls across their time, not just the Inca, where we find those cool things like Juanita the Mummy, but the Moche way before them were sacrificing young women in droves. We find like caches of, 50 strangled women under temple floors. And again, that's sacrifice. Is that like, yeah, fuck those bitches? Or was that like, they're our most precious commodity and we give them to the gods?
Juanita the Mummy? I never heard of that.
Sorry if I can't curse on your podcast there.
I may bleep it. I usually leave it. But no, you made your point. And you mentioned Juanita the Mummy? I haven't heard of that.
You know her? She's a cool one. She's now in the town of Arequipa. She's on display 6 months of the year, and then 6 months there's one called Sarita that shows up. I don't know why they give Juanita a break in her glass case, but she's a mummified young woman that they found in a volcano just north of the city. They found it, I want to say the 1960s or 70s. The volcano blew up. Some, enthusiastic mountaineers went up there immediately to see what had happened, and it had dislodged this part that had Juanita the Mummy, who was a sacrificed young girl in in Inca times. And she had a beautiful shawl on her, and her skin's still there, and her hair's still there. And she was a young woman. We know from colonial documents that this was a thing. They would pick a very pure young woman to sacrifice. And Juanita's one of these that they brought up to the top of the mountains, which they called apus, which had spirits of their own, to give this girl Juanita. And she rolled out of the volcano when it shook. And now she's in a glass case in Arequipa.
And somehow the volcano preserved her?
No, I think it was the extreme altitude and cold, dry air.
Well, so she was just sitting there, out there, and didn't. Wow, that's amazing.
There's lots of mummies where when they put them up way high, they desiccate, but they don't rot.
There's no bugs. Yeah.
No.
Wow.
No, I mean I've seen, frankly, too many just desiccated people.
And just staying on the topic of women, the naming of the Amazon, is that based on the first account of Orellana seeing what he thought was giant women, women warriors.
That's what I've read, that it was Oriana who coined that term, and it was because of an encounter he had. He was the first Spaniard coming from Peru. They went down the Andes and they found the Amazon and followed it all the way out to the Atlantic. About midway along that journey, they encountered a really fierce tribe who were shooting arrows at them from the banks of the river, and that a number of them were women, and that they were deadly warrior women that were shooting at them. And this made a big impression on him. So when he finished it and wrote it up, he called the river the Amazon. And subsequently, the entire rainforest has now been called the Amazon. But he was, a Spanish soldier who was acquainted with the Greek myths and history. And there was a group of very fierce, one-boobied women named the Amazon in the top of the Aegean Sea, right? Like by Thrace. That's where the Amazons lived. And he named it after them.
You think there's any truth to a giant, according to him, pale-skinned group of women, warriors down in the Amazon?
No, honestly, I think a lot of these things just get misinterpreted. I mean, they might have been of lighter skin, but I don't think they were giant white people. There's stories from the Amazon too. The Andes as well. I just don't, I've read a lot of those things. Some of them that claim that they said they were white guys, they didn't actually do it. I haven't read Oriana's, I'll admit. So this conversation makes me want to go back and see exactly what he said about them. I am dubious that he said they were giant white women. He said they were warrior women, but I'm going to go back and read that part. But there's a number of them from Peru where they said they were white guys, but it turned out that actually, that was a priest 100 years later who read some priest's document, who talked to an Indian, but that Indian and the document are gone now, and all we have is Barnabé de Coba from 150 years later who said they were white guys. It's a lot of them, when you really try to track them down, get ugly telephone game.
So just thinking about the downfall of these great civilizations, was it all disease that wiped them all out?
I think that was the primary factor, honestly. I mean, it was a deadly storm for them, just as, not just one disease. I mean, Europe was wiped out repeatedly by one disease at a time. For the people of the Americas, there were, multiple diseases that hit at once. First, all the European ones where, they got herd immunity. Those guys were herd immunity, but they were still carriers. So there were probably people in the first decade or two that died of mumps, measles, and bubonic plague simultaneously. I mean, so people got wiped out by these diseases, which undermined their entire religion and their entire way they thought the world worked. And just as that was happening, and they dwindled down to a small, much more controllable group, a whole bunch of priests told them, if you just become Christians, you'll survive this. And then they lined them up and used the same bowl of holy water to anoint them, which basically rubbed the disease on their face and accelerated it further.
Gosh. I didn't even think about that.
There was an account from a priest in Brazil who had created these utopian communities, and his journal is like desperate because, this is the early 1500s. We didn't figure out infectious disease theory or,
germ theory
until the late 1500s. So they were still under the four humors theory that were made of blood, bile, yellow phlegm, and black phlegm or something. No idea. So this guy's journal said, I don't know why God keeps punishing these people. They're doing everything I ask, and I'm baptizing 10,000 people a day. And yet they still die in droves, not realizing that it was him that was spreading the disease on people's faces. 10,000 a day, apparently.
I wonder if this could have been prevented in any way. It seems like it was inevitable once contact was made, that this was just going to spread like wildfire.
I think that, yes, it was inevitable. that this was going to happen at some point, be it the 1500s or wherever, when an isolated population met anybody from Europe or Asia, this disease would have spread like a wildfire. I think that the timing, if it had been a century later where we had an understanding of germ theory, perhaps, the behavior of people would have been different. By the time Pizarro got down to South America, the king himself had died of an infectious disease, and they had not touched the area yet. So this was like natives running from community to community, trying to outrun this disease, making it all the way into the Andes before the Spanish did. The disease was there before they were.
I'm curious about psychedelics, but it's hard to talk about something so broad across an area that's so big. But are there...
Again, pick a region.
Yeah, I guess Aztec. I mean, when were the Aztecs are such an extreme civilization. I'm curious to know what they're doing with psychedelics there.
We don't have a whole lot of information on the Aztecs. Mesoamerica and North America in general, there's spots and then there's big gaps. For the Aztecs, the best evidence that they're doing anything psychedelic is mushrooms. There's certain things in Aztec codices that show mushrooms, codices that were written for the Spanish, that call them things like flesh of the gods. But they stop short of saying that they are used by priests and shamans to connect to the other world. So they may be using that. They're in a region where they could have been using datura or even peyote if they went north into the desert. Again, there's really no art or codices that tell us that. The Maya are the same way. The Maya had tobacco, and there's early things that are like mushroom statues that people use as evidence, but it falls short of saying they were actually tripping. You go down to South America, they're using all sorts of drugs. You go up to the American Southwest, peyote's a big thing, and datura. But here's the interesting thing. They're all, it's part of a religious practice. The reason that they're using these psychedelics is not recreational. It's to expand their mind, and they see it as actually entering the other world and interacting with the spirit world and the world of the dead. Across the Americas, civilizations did this, every civilization, but not all of them used psychedelic drugs to get there. You have things like the Vision Quest, where the goal there was to, exhaust yourself through days of travel without food or water or sometimes sleep, and they would hit this exhaustion point that would trigger their vision. That was what the Vision Quest was about, and it really didn't involve any drugs at all. For the Maya, it appears to be bloodletting, not cutting somebody else, but cutting yourself. That sensory deprivation, being in darkness, being starved, being lack of water. And then when you get to that state, for the Maya, it's similar to the Vision Quest, but what they'd do is they'd cut themselves. And that loss of blood and the shock of the cut is what would trigger the vision. And that is clear as day in their art.
Really?
We see them do this again and again. Women pull a rope through their tongue, but it's this, you can trigger a hallucination without psychedelics. So my conclusion, which is shared by many, is that psychedelic drugs were used with certain cultures, others not, but the goal was the same, to connect to the other world.
I see. Wow, and I never thought that bloodletting would lead to a psychedelic. I don't know how evolution brought that about.
A very widely understood theory or accepted theory that it was the bloodletting that triggered the vision. And the Maya show it. There's people bloodletting, and then what they do is they bloodlet. Men would cut their penises and tie pieces of paper around them, and that paper would get soaked in the blood. And then they put that paper into a bowl and they light it on fire, and the smoke goes up and it becomes a serpent, which burps out ancestors and people to that person. So they're having a vision of their ancestors, and a communication with them, what we'd call a hallucination, but it's triggered by the bloodletting and then the burning of that blood.
Wow, that's so intense. And I'm also thinking about ayahuasca. I mean, that is amazing that they figured out to combine those two plants that, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of plants, and to figure out that those two, there's the ayahuasca that makes you
yapo or something.
There's an inhibitor that allows you to absorb the ayahuasca and then have the psychedelic trip. And if you don't have that inhibitor,
I think it's called like yapo or something.
Right.
I got, after the Lex Friedman podcast, I must have had 100 emails explaining to me that, no, man, it's not they don't do the ayahuasca with the tube up the nose. That's the yapo. And then they do the ayahuasca in a brew.
Hape is I think it's like a tobacco in your nose. You inhale it or something.
I think they did all sorts of stuff. I still stand by, despite those 100 emails, that that is, I'm not saying that's not true, but I do know I talked to a strange little old anthropologist named Johannes Wilbur. He's dead years ago, but he was initiated into like 17 different tribes in the Amazon over his lifetime. And there was always some sort of ayahuasca ritual. And he was talking about that they would shoot ayahuasca right up his nose, and that they'd also take the same blowgun and they'd put it in their butts and shoot it in there. And I asked him directly, did you get stuff shot in your butt? And he said, I don't want to talk about it. So he did. But he was like, he was the OG. I mean, he taught all these new age folks what ayahuasca was about. So I don't deny that there are other processes, but Johannes Wilbur was the OG.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any problem with Westerners just coming down for a few days down to the Amazon and then doing ayahuasca and then going back to their 9-to-5 job. Like, I feel like you need to have the context.
Not settling.
Yeah, I think you need to live the life for a while before getting that experience.
It certainly is a life-changing experience. And, I think it's so cool of Amazonian folks to invite people from outside their culture to take part in these things. I think they really feel like people from the outside world are children that don't understand how the world works, and it's their moral obligation to help them learn.
Well, we are thankful. Big question. Are there any monuments or artifacts that puzzle you around how they were built? Like, just completely puzzle you?
Inca walls, the perfectly fused together Inca walls. I don't think we have a reasonable explanation for those. They are beautiful. They have stood the test of time. And, most of my colleagues believe that it was just a process of like lifting up the 3-ton stone, pecking on it a little bit more with another rock. Oh, put it back down. Oh, that wasn't perfect. Lift it up again. I don't believe that. That's too brute a solution for such elegant people. I think they're fused together somehow. I think that they are shaping it with some form of acid or another. I have not proved that yet. Many people have tried. I'm not the first person to say that, or even in the first generation of people who have suggested that. But I think in the end, we're going to find that they used acids. But at the moment, it's startling, the way they were able to put together these walls. And, we love to look at the megalithic ones and the huge stones that they fit together perfectly. But they're equally impressive to me is all the what we call imperial architecture in Cusco. There are walls that the bricks are not huge. They're, maybe like the size of a cinder block, but they're so perfectly fit together. And they go on. If you walk through the streets of Cusco, you can walk for blocks along these just perfectly made walls that are still standing there. The Spanish tried to knock them down, but they just wore their hand out trying to knock them down. And there are weird places along those walls. I've been in Cusco like 20 times, and sometimes I'll just spend the whole day just wandering around. But even some major spots that tourists walk by every day, every once in a while you'll find one of those blocks that have this pillowing. They're kind of like puffy on the outside. and one of the pillows will have just like a wipe mark on it, like somebody took a paper towel and wiped a muddy surface. And I just look at those and go, how the hell did that happen? Why is there like a muddy wipe on just this one brick? And I think it's acid squeezing out of the cracks as they're making them. And somebody's like, oh, you got some paint on that wipe.
Wow.
And that, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, that happened. But those confuse me. Those are, you ask me what I don't understand, and then I spent the next 5 minutes trying to explain that I might understand them, but I don't understand them.
Well, the acid thing is really sparked my curiosity. I've never heard that acid could fuse rocks or move rocks, or how would that work?
Oh God, there's anecdotal stories from contact period that certain stones that they had a way of softening stones. There's a bunch of accounts that people at Lake Titicaca are taking stones and then molding them into figures that then congeal into these solid figures. There's a weird story about the Spanish going through some field in Peru where their spurs melted off. There's another one where they're in a mine and somebody spills a jar that the Inca are using on the stone ground, and the stone gets muddy. And like it's the account of a captain who's breaking it up because the Spanish soldiers are trying to make this poor Inca guy drink out of the same jar that made the stones mushy. So there's little things like that. There's also this weird bird from the Amazonian side of the Andes that chews up berries or leaves, and it becomes acid in his little mouth, and then he pecks on a cliff wall with the acid, and it burns a little cave for him. And there are these cliffs that are full of these little bird caves where they used acid that they made in their mouths to make it. I don't think it's any of those. There's also some theories that you could just pee on it. Those are terrible theories.
I mean, could we test this with modern chemistry?
We can. In fact, I had a crew a couple years ago ready to go to Cusco with me. But when I asked Cusco if I could take some samples out of their walls, they were like, beat it, gringo. No.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to get back to that. I need like a Peruvian partner or some other angle, but the city was like, no way. But I had you can do neutron activation. I had a chemistry crew say, we can take these drills, take out from the seams between these stones a sample that's about the size of a wine bottle cork, and get those to our lab. We'll break them up and we'll see. And if there are acids that were dissolved in that seam, we should be able to detect them. So I have a crew ready to do it. I just don't have any samples yet.
Huh, or could we reverse engineer it and just try to use acid on a rock?
Well, I kind of have reversed engineered it, but my chemistry colleagues are like, well, yeah, we know we can do it. You got to prove that they did it.
Oh, really?
Because like my theory is, and I did this in partners with chemists. The main one is a great guy named Charlie Wynn that's from Massachusetts. But we started thinking about what acids are strong enough to burn andesite. My dad was a chemist, and he was like down on my theory. He was like, there's no natural acid that could possibly do that, which I accepted. But we make very powerful acids. So I started thinking, Charlie brought it up first. HF could do it, reverse engineer it. What could burn andesite? Well, hydrofluoric acid, which is a very controlled substance. Only a few chemistry labs in the United States are allowed to make it and contain it. It's from, did you watch Breaking Bad? You remember that scene where they're trying to burn the body and it goes through the bathtub and through the floor? They brought the HF in a plastic jar and it was fine, but when they put it in the porcelain, it burned through the house. That's HF. And HF can dissolve andesite, but everything that's a chemical reaction uses up what it's reacting and burns out. So if you use just a very minor amount, it would cause a reaction, it would burn things flat, and then it would stop. So that's my theory, that they're using HF, and really all you need is hydrochloric acid and fluorite. Hydrochloric acid is a major environmental problem in Peru today because it's a byproduct of their mining. The gold, silver, and copper mines are leaking hydrochloric acid out of them because they're a byproduct of the mining process that the Inca were using as well. So they had hydrochloric acid. The other one was fluorite, and the Andes are one of our best sources of fluorite. In fact, the Inca were making lots of jewelry out of fluorite. So they had the peanut butter and the jelly. I just can't prove they put them together yet.
That's a really extraordinary theory.
I hope it's true. If it's not, and if Cusco or maybe Ollantaytambo ever lets me take those samples, I'll either be a hero or admit I'm wrong and move on to my next idea.
I'll let you know when I make that star telescope. We can look down on them.
Oh yeah, no, the time telescope. That'd be a good one. I like that because, people ask me like, oh, if you could go back in time to the Maya, would you? Like, no, I think I'd be sacrificed before the sun went down. But from a distance, that would be nice.
What's really astonishing is that the Aztec and Inca, when I was looking at their time scales, or the time spans that they lasted, such a short amount of time, like about 100 years each. It's really amazing.
Can you imagine what they would have turned into given a couple hundred more years? Heck, America's only been at it for 250 years right now. I think the Aztecs would have burned out. I think the Inca would have become one of the world's greatest civilizations. They were 10 million people, and no one in their empire needed shelter or food. No one starved. Everyone was housed. There were celebrations every month of food excess. They had solved world hunger, and we've never done that since.
And they didn't have to
I wish the Inca were still around.
the sacrifice as much, or did they do it at all?
No, they really didn't do. There was an initial rocky period where they were like establishing the empire. I think they did rip the skin off of a few people and use them as drums. But then they calmed down with that. They would show up with like 5,000 people to or 50,000 people to a 5,000 person village and say, we invite you to be part of the Inca Empire. And if you don't want to be, we will peacefully escort you to the edge. But that stays from here. And so they kind of eventually they expanded through overwhelming show of force rather than killing everyone. They sacrificed llamas. There was a big black llama sacrifice that the Sapa Inca would do every Inti Raymi. But humans, not much.
Wow, yeah. I mean, it blows my mind that these civilizations only lasted about 100 years, because I just kind of assumed that they lasted over 1,000 years. And then when I looked at the dates, I said, that can't be right. No way.
That's totally true, but it's missing the fact that both of those civilizations are standing on the shoulders of giants. In the case of the Inca, yes, they only lasted 150 years, but they were using technologies, culture ways that have been in development for 3,000 years. Same thing with the Aztecs. They walked in as a mercenary group to the Valley of Mexico, which had been a thriving source of civilization for almost 3,000 years before that. And they had the Maya, you had the Olmec, you had the Zapotec. I mean, there were thousands of years of cultural development that led to the Aztec and the Inca. And they were great renditions that would have gone even further had not the Spanish showed up. The other one that we'll never know what they would have developed into was the Mississippians. Do you know who the Mississippians are? They are the pyramid building civilization of North America that nobody talks about. They started at about 900 CE, and they were here when the Spanish arrived. De Soto went through town after town with huge palisade walls, aqueducts, giant pyramids with kings sitting on top with palaces. They're all still there too. I mean, we've mowed down a lot of them, but the Mississippians were a major civilization of millions of people in America And the majority of Americans have never even heard of them. Don't feel bad you haven't heard of them. Nobody
Well, do we call
has.
them mound builders?
Mound
It
builders.
seems like we're
Yep,
afraid
that's
to
the pejorative term we use.
we're afraid to say the word pyramid.
The Cahokia's mound was over 100 feet tall. It, covered an area of 5 football fields, and the city had 20,000 inhabitants at 1000 AD.
Wow.
That's not a mound. That's a whole city. And the surrounding area was more like 40,000 people. And it began a tradition. Cahokia is the primordial city, but it began a tradition that spread all the way to the Atlantic and lasted for the next 500 years until psychos like DeSoto showed up and delved out all the disease and destruction.
There's a theory about called the Tale of Two Industries, where you come across some of these ancient sites, especially in Egypt, and you'll see like two distinctive building periods. There's one with like giant stones and everything is precise and symmetrical, and then there's like a distinct layer where everything gets kind of crude and it's almost like mimicking the part below. So it's like the older part is better built than the newer part. And I'm wondering, do you see that at all when you see like an Inca site and you see like little bricks on top of these giant, perfectly fit together stones? Does that ever, you ever think that maybe they inherited and built on top of something that was already there, possibly?
Yes, and yes. Yes, I do see that evidence where, we kind of think of civilization as this, upward progression from the beginning to the end. But there's all sorts of hiccups where everybody forgets everything. And, I think there's a term Lazarus technologies where people just forget these ancient technologies. The Inca world's a great example. There are huge megalithic temples that are the earliest stuff in Cusco that are using that fusing technique or, really tight architecture, I'll just say, that turns into smaller cobbly buildings. The Maya do it too. As an archaeologist in the Maya area, I know when I walk up to a building, if it's got megalithic stones, it's pre-classic. Because in the classic period, they started using stones that an individual could carry. It's weird that they were larger. Larger is just one, data point. But Tikal is another example where it's a city that lives for centuries. But in my opinion, and the opinion of many, the most beautiful and sophisticated ceramics they made were at the very beginning. They just got worse as time went on. And I wonder, you especially as an artist, is this not so much a linear progression of culture and civilization and technology, but an appreciation of art and aesthetics that comes in and out of culture?
Yeah.
We're in a brutal period right now where nobody thinks that art's worth a shit. But, guys like me and you think that's the cornerstone of what it is to be human.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I like what you said, where we think that it's just this linear progression where things just get better, we get more advanced, smarter, all these things, but it's really not like that. I mean, if you really dig into it, I mean, there are things that we can't figure out how to do today that humans 50 years ago were like, oh, that's easy. I mean, maybe in 20 years, people are like, wait, you actually went outside? Or wait, you actually sent text with your fingers? Wow, you were able to use your fingers? Or you actually chewed your food? Maybe things that we think are just normal today, sometime in the future, they're going to be like amazed that we're doing it.
Or we'll be cavemen again.
Yeah. Yeah.
You think you go through Egypt and Greece and Rome. What happens next? The Dark Ages. We go completely just, mead-swilling pig farmer for a few centuries. And then we crawl out of that there's a huge blip in just Western civilization. It's really not a line of technological progression up and up.
Speaking of the Dark Ages, the Vikings were prominent in the Dark Ages, right?
I think that the worst of the Dark Ages was a little after them. I could be wrong. I'm an Americanist. I don't have my chronology embedded in my head. I believe that the Vikings go from like 600 to 1,000, so that's at least part of those Dark Ages.
That was just my sad attempt to sway us into the Vikings apparently got to the Americas way before Columbus, way before the Spanish. Is that true?
Yes. Virtually undeniably at this point. There's a site called Lanceau Meadows in Canada on the coast. I forget which state it was, but it's definitely a Viking settlement. We know from the sagas of the Vikings that Eric the Red was cast into Iceland and Greenland, and that they made forays into Canada. The fishing was really great there. They were, fisherman culture. His brother Leif Erikson's the one that went. Eric the Red was their psycho dad who couldn't stop killing people in Europe, so they banished him to Iceland. And then Eric the Red and his brother, Thor, I think his name is, went to Canada. His brother died there. I think they got repelled, but they were there.
And then that civilization or that settlement couldn't last?
No, the local tribes who were really, hunter-gatherer types. They weren't building major cities in northern Canada. Nobody's doing that today. But they were fierce people who just would not have anything of the Vikings and attacked their settlements every day until they left.
And then they all just...
We know that's in sagas as well, but we found Lanceau Meadows. So we know there's at least one definite Viking spot. It's got like over 800 Viking artifacts. The buildings are built in this sod roof Viking style. It's undeniable, and it's about 1000 CE. So it's 500 years before Columbus. But I think about that, and that's early enough before the next huge wave of infectious diseases in Europe, which might just be a simple explanation. But if the Vikings were there in any consistent way, why didn't the epidemic disease spread start right then? And we don't see any evidence of that. Not all of the epidemic diseases show up in the pathology of skeletons. So some of them could just escape pathology at the moment, but we don't see that flood of infectious diseases that we do see in the 1500s when the Spanish start arriving.
Okay, I grew up in San Francisco around a very dense Chinese population, and they would always say that Chinese people were here like 4,000 years ago. They made it to the west coast of America. Is there any truth to maybe an Asian voyage getting to the Americas?
I think the vote's still out on that. I would not take that one off the table either. There's a wonderful book called, I have it here somewhere, 1421. That famous book was 1491, the one that Charles Mann wrote about contact. But there's 1421 is assembling evidence that the Chinese did hit the coast of California, I'll say decades before Europe hit the other coast. And there is some proof, or there's historical fact, that there was an emperor in China who was very oriented towards creating a navy. And he created giant naval ships and giant trading ships that we know he sent all the way around Southeast Asia. They contacted India, they contacted Africa, and there's a big breadcrumb trail of Roman coins leading back to China. So we know they went that direction that far. The question is, did he send them across the Pacific too? And the frustration is that the very next emperor decided that was all nonsense and ordered all the boats burned. So it just ended. It was a single emperor who did have navies capable of it. Now, the question is, will we ever find one of those ships? If we could find a wrecked ship off of California, that'd be fantastic. That'd be one of those paradigm shifting things that I would be excited to be a part of.
That would be so exciting.
So many people, and there are gatekeepers in my community. There are people who are intolerant of outlandish theories. But I think the majority of my colleagues would be absolutely thrilled to be proved wrong in what we think we know and be part of a moment like that where we could say, China went to America's first. That'd be great. The evidence isn't there yet, but there's reason to keep looking.
So is there some sort of organized cabal of archaeologists that tries to suppress pseudoscientists or ideas that they don't approve of, and they tamper with Wikipedia. Is that true, or is it like that?
Well, there are certainly, people are people, and there are malcontents in my community. I wouldn't call them a cabal. Most of them are like, most archaeologists are nerds. We spend our life reading and theorizing and looking at broken pieces of ceramics and stuff. We're not, but the reality is that very few of us are Indiana Jones. We are nerds, and some of them are, intolerant of all this stuff, even jealous, I would say, of the kind of, great press or numbers that, every time Graham Hancock writes a book, it sells millions of copies. Every time my colleague writes a book, we get like $10 in residuals a month.
Yeah.
It's just not popular stuff. So there's a jealousy factor. But and there's certainly on both sides some fiery people who are making it worse. But I would say, at least from, I don't even want to say side, but I'm an archaeologist, so I'm in that camp. The vast majority of my colleagues don't worry themselves about these alternative theories. I think that we feel like the truth eventually floats to the top. Let's have it all out in the open, and the best ideas will remain and the falsehoods will fall away naturally, as they always had done. The people that I really respect and care about, they're like that. I've been on Ancient Aliens a lot, which there
really?
are certain of
I
my
didn't know that.
colleagues that send me nasty emails every time they see me. Like, you're a betrayer. I can't believe you're supporting this kind of slop. But I have never received that email from the people that I really seek the approval of. It's always some, they're little dogs who bark loud.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think you're doing a great service by coming out as an archaeologist with your experience, with your credentials, but you're communicating these ideas in a way that it needs to be communicated for the majority of people that don't have an archaeology degree, so we can understand. We don't understand this like high academic jargon. We're not going to be reading these journals, but the communication aspect of academia is so important. And, we're living in a time where you can spend $50 million in 20 years doing a scientific research paper, put it out in some journal, nobody's going to read it. But then you can have some teenager in their kitchen pick up their phone and make a TikTok video and 10 million people watch it. And it's like, I can see why there's this envy there, but it's great to bridge that.
Understandable.
Yeah, it's great to,
and it's more than just envy. It's like, some of the folks that are upset about this are like, I've dedicated my life to conservatively trying to discover the truth. And, almost nobody's even watching what I'm doing. And now here's this Yahoo who makes a video about a 2-kilometer tunnel under Giza, and 1 million people think he's great. It's more than just I'm envious. Like, you are ruining all of the work we've been doing for years by just inserting a wrong idea that appeals to people in front. But what are we going to do? We're going to whine. We're going to cry about it. We've got to meet the moment. I think that we need to be in scenarios like this. We need to do the YouTube videos. We need to do the podcasts. And one of my pet peeves is you've got to talk to people in the language they understand. There's an academic compunction to use the vernacular of our field to make us look like we're smart and we know what we're talking about. But really, it loses half of our audience, in my opinion. There's no need to use all these complicated terms when you're trying to educate the general public. When you're writing an academic paper for other academics, sure, pile them on. But if you're trying to explain to a group of students, don't do that.
totally. So what are you most excited about with this new technology and our ability to discover what's been hidden to us in the Americas, in the Amazon?
Oh, I think LiDAR has just incredible potential. It's going to change things. We are not there yet, but there's no reason we can't get there. A lot of the The software's proprietary, the equipment's expensive, but that's been changing. And, just like, the first projector I ever bought, it was a giant, stupid, clunky thing, and it cost me $3,000. Now I can buy one this small for like $79. It's eventually it'll become more accessible, and we'll use it, not just for archaeology. Gosh, the applications of LiDAR are amazing. Just, in search and rescue, in archaeology, but, in urban planning. That's the technology. I'd say that and DNA studies. DNA studies are already on the way. As I said at the start of our conversation, I think they're still going through some growing pains. But once we get past that, wow. I mean, me as a young student would have never guessed that we could answer questions like we can answer now because of DNA studies. It's amazing.
That's awesome. I hope that you can get out there and just take a drone up or whatever this LiDAR, I don't even know how it works, but go out there and just survey the whole Amazon and the ocean.
I think that future technology, that's going to allow us to do that. Right now it's growing, but in the same way that, gosh, they say that the lunar lander had like 3 kilobytes of memory. Like it was less than a Pac-Man game. And now look where we're at. The ability to process these things has gone exponentially forward. I hope LiDAR does the same thing. Though I will say that maybe this makes me old, but the speed of technology worries me. That we are moving so fast. I had one like a biology professor give me an analogy that always stuck with me, that if you take any system that you're studying and you put it on a graph of change over time, a healthy change is kind of a slow slope, but if the slope goes too fast up, that's a system in crisis, and you expect that slope to back up on itself. If you apply the pace of technology in that graph, it's going up so fast, that's not showing a healthy system. That's showing a system in crisis that's about to double back on itself. So the rate of change versus the time disturbs me.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to my grandma. She's 91, and she said, "Oh, I'm taking a computer class. I'm trying to learn how to use a computer." I said, at this point, it's probably not worth it, because you're just going to get some email from a scammer. It's just going to open you up to all these problems. It's probably better to just stay off it at this point. Yeah.
I love how the older generation is always like, we've got to save the children from the internet. No, we got to save you from the internet, Grandma. You fall for everything. Yeah. The kids just have like a innate skill of knowing when something's bullshit, and they just skip over it like a rock in the stream. It's the old who need to be kept off the internet, not the young.
Unfortunately, the kids have gone the opposite route, and they're cynical about everything. A lot of them, because it's easier to be cynical about everything, because then you're never the fool that gets duped. But it's like, I always say to them, it's okay to be cynical. You're never going to lose, but you're also never going to win.
They've got a lot of reasons to be cynical these days. I do not envy anybody dreaming of their future in this now.
Do you run tours?
Yeah, I do. I've run many, many tours. I've got some guys running some of them for me now too, but I've done tours all over the world, over 200 of them. I love that. That's, teaching in the real world is my favorite thing to do.
When's your next tour?
May. I'm bringing 13 people around the American Southwest.
I would love to go on one of your tours.
Please do. I'd love to.
Is it on your website?
Tour. That one's on my website. Well, actually, that one I'm running through my second company called Ancient Explorations. But my main company that I'm the director of, a nonprofit called Maya Exploration Center, mayaexploration.org is the website. And yeah, we bring people. We've got a trip going to Peru. We've got a trip going to Guatemala, a great one to Mexico. So we have a lot of trips going on, and we're always in conversations about the next one. You and I should talk about it. You're a VIP. Tell me where you're interested to go. We'll put together something. Invite some friends.
Oh, I have tons of friends that would love to go. Yeah, I will definitely be on one of your tours.
Yeah. Let's talk about it. I'll make you a custom tour. Maybe I'll even lead it myself.
Sweet. I'll try not to bring too many kooks and conspiracy quacks.
Oh, no, I love those
Yeah,
guys.
they're fun.
I found that anybody who's really out there has solved all their money problems. They're good supporters. They're looking for the outlandish ideas at that point.
Yeah, I've been on a bunch of geology tours that are kind of about catastrophism with Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and Uncharted X. I don't know if you know that guy, but yeah,
I know of him.
And the people that get drawn onto these trips are just the best. They're so entertaining. They're very free-minded thinkers. It's a good group.
I've been with some of the kind of, outlandish, as you say, groups, and I totally agree. They're usually just, big-hearted, lovely folks looking for the mysteries of the world. I rarely find one who's like mean-spirited in that context.
They're mean people.
They're looking for the truth.
100%. So yeah, I'll look into your tours, and I hope any listener out there checks out your website and your tours, and your YouTube channel is amazing too.
Thanks. That's really where I'm trying to go these days. I'm kind of an old dog in a new area, but I love making these YouTube videos, and my podcast has been a lot of fun. I did the podcast first because I was scared to be on camera. But then everybody was like, you should really do the YouTube thing. So I've done that too, and it's taken off. I love it. It's the new way to communicate, and I'm getting a lot of good responses, and I will not be a young man forever. I can't lead people up pyramids for the rest of my life. I need to find a way to keep transmitting my learning in a age-appropriate fashion.
Yeah. Do you have a team that's editing your videos, or?
Yes, the YouTube videos, I've got some nice guys out of India. Hi, Ashley. And they're doing a great job for me. I'm a little, I bucked the trend. Most people go like, never get somebody from outside the country to do your stuff. But you know what? I like it. I like Ashley and his team. They're doing good things for me.
Your videos look great. The thumbnails are awesome.
Well, thanks. Yeah, you see, he just showed me a great one today. My next video is going to be about another Olmec subject that the Olmec are shaving their heads bald. And he has a great thumbnail for it. He's a great creative guy. So, yes, unorthodox, but I do have a little team working with me. The podcast's all me. That's nobody but me on that one. But the videos take work beyond my skills.
Yeah, I can see your YouTube channel just growing super fast. I think it is, right?
I just got my most popular video ever. I got a 400K video, and I just went over 20K subs, which is not much, but it's my best.
Hey, the first 100 subscribers is a lot harder than getting to 1 million, because just to get the first few people to be like, all right, I'll subscribe. That's a big commitment, But
the thing I enjoy the most about it is just new challenges and learning new things. I'm a lifelong learner, and this is all new to me, and I learn something new every day, and I love it.
Sweet. Well, I can't wait to keep watching your channel, and hopefully I'll see him in real life.
I would love that. Let's talk later about that.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much. And this has been a great podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.